There we go. Okay, so if you're on YouTube, you're probably seeing this. I got to reset this camera. Sorry about that. That happens. Okay, so let's see what happens there. Okay, so it's good to see everybody here with us this evening. Got lots and lots that we're going to talk about, although I'm not 100% sure exactly where this is going to go. I got some ideas. But before we get started with all of that, let's see. I'm still getting used to this YouTube thing. They've changed things. So either way, I'm very thankful you are with us this evening. Trent is not available. He is not here. So we're missing him a lot, but keep him in your prayers, and hopefully he'll be back for too long and all will go well with him. I want to say hello to lots of people who are joining us. And if I don't say this enough, I have to say this. And so give me just a moment. I really appreciate the way that so many watch and are just very, very open about this, and I'm very thankful for that. We have learned a lot from each other over the course of the last couple of years that I've been doing this, that we've been doing this, and been able to grow. And this is a wonderful thing. We're on 106 videos. That I really figured we would have concluded after maybe 10 or 15 or 20, when we started this. So I'm thankful. I'm very, very thankful that this has turned out the way that it has. So we have lots of recurring viewers, some of which Dusty Rose and Tim Ogles and my wife. And I see Karen representing the Claft clan from Michigan. And just so many people join on a weekly basis, and I'm very thankful for that. Get lots of comments often. I'm very thankful for that. So I also have to let you know that I am not able to see all of these comments. They come so fast often that I can't keep up with them, and I'm not a multitasker. So usually I've got a subject in mind, and I'll try to go through that. But thank you so much for watching. And I see Kathy and Leon and Robert with us, and Greg Wallace and James Barcelona. That name, James Barcelona, I see that often. It's just like a movie star name. So that's pretty neat. But Scott and Bobby and so many people join. And the reason I think people do is because what we discuss here is very unusual. It's unusual because the nature of the topics is something most people have never heard of, especially coming from, if you've been in the Church of Christ. Matter of fact, coming from pretty much any facet of Christendom here today. This is not a topic that most people talk about very much at all. Let me give you a little background here. About 3 years ago is when I really saw this, and I had to say, listen, I'm a preacher in the Church of Christ, if you've never got that. Matter of fact, to give you a little information here, I preach at the West Side Church of Christ in Indianapolis, Indiana, and a finer group of Christians you simply could not look for and find. So very thankful for those brethren. And they have decided to study things and see if what I was seeing was true. I essentially went to them and said, this is what I've been seeing. I can't deny this anymore, for very basic reasons. The basic thing that really, really got me was Matthew 16, 27, 28. That's one of the verses. The first one that I saw that really turned me on to just listening to the Lord and not letting men distract me from that was Matthew 5, 17, 18. But one of the passages that's just so plain, so simple, so clear, it's Matthew 16, 27, 28. But yet it's been made out to be one of the most impossibly complex passages to describe anywhere. And it just simply doesn't have to be. As a matter of fact, let's consider this. Let's consider this. You see the title there says, Yes, the Lord has returned. And I mean that. He has returned and he's not going to return again. But that return is not what we have been taught. And for many, many reasons. I think that there are some kind of behind the scenes things that would really take some digging to try to figure out why this came about. There's some things that are just really really evident, and maybe we'll talk about some of those things tonight. But Matthew 16 verse 27-28 does not have to be complicated, because Jesus simply said what he means. It's just that easy. So here's what this says. The Son of Man is going to come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and will then repay every man according to his deeds. Truly I say to you, there are some of those who are standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Now, it's so simple. It's just so simple. Greg, I agree with you. So hopefully, post your questions. I'll try to get to them, and maybe if you have specific stuff, maybe send me a what do you call it? A message. But either way, Matthew 16, 27-28, Jesus simply said, and I quote, "There are some of those who are standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." There you go. It's just that simple. Well, the hard part is accepting what Jesus said versus what you and I have been taught in our modern era. That's the difficult part, because we've been taught, well, I didn't see it, so it didn't happen. Really? Let me ask you this question. If you didn't see it, therefore it didn't happen, does that logic follow suit with everything when it comes to your interpretation and understanding of the Bible? Let me give you an example. You didn't see Jesus, so therefore, how do you know that he came? That he was in physical bodily form coming, in his first coming to do his messianic work. How is that? Matter of fact, let's follow this a little further. Since you didn't see Jesus resurrect from the dead, how do you know that it happened? Okay, now you're starting to go, well, I read the Bible and I believe what the Bible has to say. Well, why does that logic stop when we can't perceive or we can't understand why something is stated the way that it is? Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 says that faith, now listen to this. I'm really not trying to take this out of context, but I'm just going to do this. It says, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. So if you or if I have not seen Jesus resurrect, does that mean that he didn't? No, through faith, we read the scriptures, and these things teach us to have faith that the scriptures are accurate, and that what Jesus said, what he promised, what he did, what he accomplished is all exactly correct. Now, if you've never followed that logic past that point, this is where this might get a little challenging for you. Jesus said in Matthew 16 that there are some people standing here in front of me that will be alive, not everybody, but some, when I come in my kingdom. They will see me coming in my kingdom. How do you reconcile that? Wait a minute. Faith is what we have when we can't see something. We believe God. Matter of fact, the reason we believe God is passages like John chapter 20. So just get your Bible and let's go through some of these things. I'm not a real complicated guy. I'm just not that way. I wasn't born that way. I'm wired backwards. It's just who I am. So here's how I have to look at things. And yeah, you can, you probably have a Bible app on your phone, right? Dusty, there's a message from here. So you got all kind of stuff on there. But there's just something about having a book in front of you. And here's what happens. When you have this book in front of you, you put notes in it. You can see here I've got a few notes there. You remember where things are at on the page. You have that tactile sensation. You're putting your hands on it. And of course, you put your hands on your phone too, especially if it's a touch screen, right? But you see these things. You remember where they're at. You can flip to it. This is a good thing. I'm not. Yeah, I mean, there's a place for the electronic stuff, but I'm just encouraging. Open your Bible. So here in John chapter 20. Listen to this. This is in verse 30. Therefore, many other signs Jesus also performed in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. Okay? But these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And that believing you may have life in his name. Okay, so you've got these things written here to prove that Jesus is the Son of God. So what things prove that Jesus is the Son of God? Well, let me give you an illustration about this. This is why understanding that the Lord has come, okay, is so critical. I want to read all these comments. Oh, Stephen, I'm so sad for you. But either way, I know where he's going with that. So anyway, I'm just going to say this. These things that are written prove that Jesus is Messiah. He's the Son of God. Now, if that's the case, then everything concerning Jesus contained in these scriptures has a particular point in time when they are prescribed to be fulfilled. Have you ever thought about that? Prophecy is not an open-ended thing. When we read prophecy in the scriptures and we see what the Bible is teaching us from Genesis to Revelation, then it's easy enough for us to, over course of time, to start noticing a thing or two, and you see repetition and things repeat themselves, and God has a particular way that he does things, and these prophecies are not open-ended. They have a time when they're prescribed to be fulfilled. Now, let's follow the logic here. So if you've got this prophecy about Jesus, there's a specific time that it's supposed to be fulfilled, and it's not fulfilled at that point in time, then how are we today supposed to perceive that? What do we do? Well, the temptation is to say, well, I did not see it with my own little eye. I didn't spy with my own little eye, right? We have the temptation to say that. Well, I didn't see it, so obviously it didn't happen. Just because you didn't see it 2,000 years after the time it was prescribed to take place does not mean that it did not happen. We got to let that soak in. What makes us so important 2,000 years after the fact that this is going to happen in our lifetime? What makes us so important? Well, you read passages that talk about us and we and you think, well, hey, this, we're taking this in the context of something that you get on Messenger, like it was just sent to you today. My friends, this Bible that we read, your translation of this in English or whatever language you're reading it in, your translation is in, was not written to you. It wasn't written to me. Was it written for me? Of course. It's eternal. This is an eternal principle, eternal concepts. This will last forever. It's one of the things Matthew 5, 17 and 18 teaches. Remember what that passage said? Turn over here and look at this. I'm encouraging you to underline these things in your Bible. So Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, Jesus said, "Do not think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill." Okay. So Jesus says, I came not to abolish it, but to fulfill it. Now, here's the idea. When it's all fulfilled, then it's removed. This is what Jesus says. It's taken out of the way. It served its purpose. Verse 18. For truly I say to you, until, oh, no. You're not going to restart on me. My other computer here is trying to restart all of a sudden. No. Bad computer. Sorry, guys. Verse 18, Matthew chapter 5. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the law until all is accomplished. Now, it's so easy for a lot of our brethren, a lot of people. They want to say, well, this is just talking about the things pertaining to Jesus. And then they want to pick and choose. And then they want to say, well, it's talking about this and it's that. And we'll pick this off here and that off of there. And we'll leave this over there. And we're not going to talk about that. Wait a minute. Do you know what a jot and a tittle is? It's not exactly dotting an I or crossing a T. It's kind of close. So if we don't dot an I as we're writing something, it could be perceived as an L maybe, or I don't know, something else, a one, depending on your penmanship, or lots of other things. If you don't cross the T, you might get the same effect. Well, in Hebrew, the jot or the tittle is a mark on a letter that can change the entire meaning of the context of what the writer is writing. So this is how specific this is. He says, look at this, verse 18. He says, I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke, jot or tittle, shall pass from the law until all is accomplished. Now, just a surface reading of this, you're going to say, well, then that means when the world is destroyed, then that means the law passes away, the law of Moses. Then it's all fulfilled. But Jesus had just said in verse 17, he says, I didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. Jesus said, while he was alive, standing on this earth nearly 2,000 years ago, I came to fulfill it. Here's our problem. Because we didn't see it, because we have, for lack of a better term, newspaper exegesis. Most people know more about the Bible than what they see in the newspaper. So, or whatever media, electronic media you've got today. So you've got this, somebody's reading the news, or they're watching the news, or they're seeing the news, however you state this, I don't know. And they say, oh, Jesus didn't return today. It's not in the newspaper. So therefore he must not have returned. Wait a minute. 2,000 years ago, Jesus standing on this earth said, this is how simple this is. What makes it so complicated is us. Today, in the first century, this would not have been earth-shattering. To those Jews who were looking for a Messiah, they understood these events would take place when he came. There's not going to be some 2,000-year gap, as so many people, and some that are watching here tonight, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say, hey, we're going to squeeze 2,000 years into a period at the end of a sentence. No, doesn't work. Okay, so Jesus said, while he was alive, breathing, standing on planet Earth, I came to fulfill this. What do you not understand about fulfilling? What do you not understand about every jot and every tittle, every last little mark of every letter of every word in the law must be fulfilled? Now, if you're going to read this literally, that means that heaven and earth will be destroyed, and then the law will pass away. But here's what we do. So the more we study, the more we read, the more we start seeing things. This is one of the things that got me. I would read and I would study, and I started seeing these things, and I'm like, wait a minute, this isn't what I was taught. I was not taught to look at things, to see a parallel, or I was never taught about Hebrew paralleling or parallelism. This is exactly what Jesus did here. So here's what Jesus did. And he does this many times. And this is just how the Hebrews and the Jews would speak. And they would write this way. And they would use a parallel statement. So they would say one thing. They would come right back and say the exact same thing in a different way. Let me give you an example that Mark 16 and verse 16. And for all the controversy that you guys out there want to give over Mark 16:16, it is a Hebrew parallelism. It's a parallel statement. He who believes and is baptized shall be saved. He who does not believe shall be condemned. So he said two things, two different ways, but you arrive at the same conclusion, right? So that pretty much covers all the bases. It leaves no doubt when we see a parallel statement. Now, let's go back to Matthew chapter 5, verse 17 and 18. Matter of fact, we see a parallel in Matthew 16, 27, 28, and I'll show you this in just a moment. But in Matthew 5, verse 17, the first part of the parallel, Jesus says, I did not come to abolish the law or the prophets. In other words, the entirety of that old covenant, Genesis through Malachi. It includes all of it, okay? I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. Well, people today want to say, well, fulfill means it's partially fulfilled. Wait a minute. Wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Jesus said, I came to fulfill these things. It's just that simple. If you were living in the first century and you were a Jew and you understood the Old Testament the way that you should, then you would listen to Jesus who claims to be the Son of God. And do you want to know what you would do? You would say, hey, he's just prophesied that everything was going to be fulfilled, and he came to do this. If this does not happen, then what? Oh, I'm not supposed to listen to this guy. The Old Testament, I think it's Deuteronomy, 18, 16 or 18, something like that, says, if you have someone come to you and they prophesy to you and it doesn't come true, then don't listen to them. Don't be afraid of them. This is what ancient Jew 2,000 years ago qualifies for ancient, right? They would have understood. So here Jesus went out on a limb to the people that were there listening to him, and he said, I didn't come to destroy the law or the prophets. Now that's significant. In other words, there's prophecy. I came to fulfill it. So if you're sitting there saying, and I know there might be one or two people that are listening here tonight, and you're saying, well, fulfill doesn't mean fulfill, go ahead and argue with Jesus. Don't argue with me, argue with Jesus, and we'll see what end of the stick you come out on, by the way. Because Jesus says, I didn't come to destroy it, but to fulfill it. And heaven and earth will not pass away until it's all fulfilled. Either we're still under the old law, and you better go start getting your doves and your rams and your goats. And we're not talking about cars, right? A ram and a goat. If you know what a ram and a goat is, you're doing well, by the way, as far as cars go. Anyway, we're not talking about that kind of stuff. We're living in 2019, so our understanding of things might be a little different. Our phraseology, the words that we use, a little different. Hello, William Sanders Bala, by the way. Good to have you with us tonight. Okay, so there you go. You're going to have to go and you're going to have to start doing all of these things. And if you think that everything in the Bible is written to you today, why are you not building an ark? Oh, you're going to say, well, that was specifically for someone else. Yes, now you got the principle. All right. So Matthew 5, 17 and 18, the first part of the parallel is, I'm going to come. This is what I'm going to do. This is going to be fulfilled in my lifetime. I will not abolish the law. I will fulfill it, thereby removing it. Now, notice what he says here in verse 18. For truly I say to you, now let's stop right there. So we see this phrase often. It's like 90 sometimes, I think, that we see this in the New Testament. And Jesus is using this And he's saying, truly I say to you. Is he changing thoughts, changing ideas? You're going to have to say yes if you're trying to shoehorn these concepts into your future. Or you can simply take it the way that Jesus meant it, and he's emphasizing something he already said. Truly I say to you, heaven and earth, or until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest stroke or letter of the law or will pass from the law until all is accomplished. In other words, when everything in the law and the prophets is fulfilled, then it passes away. Until that takes place, it's still in force. It has a purpose. God didn't create things just to wreak havoc, you know. He created that law for a purpose. That purpose was to teach us about sin and death, teach us about our separation from Yahweh, and the prescribed remedy, which would be Messiah, when he would come and fulfill everything, remove that old covenant that could not save people, and bring in the new covenant that is eternal in its salvific work, or the work of salvation. Okay? You know, it's really just that simple. But people make it so complicated because they say, well, I didn't read it in the newspaper. You're not going to read it in the newspaper because it's already happened. This is ancient history, 2,000 years old, and it had to be fulfilled in the time frame that Jesus said, or else, hey, don't be afraid of this prophet. Now, I want to show you something scary, scary, scary. We're going to go to the book of Revelation. Okay? So are you scared yet? Don't be. Revelation is John's version of the Olivet Discourse. Did you get that? Revelation is John's version of the Olivet Discourse. Have you ever wondered why John does not have any of that information in his gospel? It's probably because he wrote Revelation before he wrote his gospel. Or, at the very least, he intended to leave it out and put it specifically in another book. So, there you go. I'm going to take a drink of my Zevia. Good stuff. Anyway, so here you've got John. He's writing his version of the Olivet Discourse. Now, granted, it's 22 chapters, so it's the Olivet Discourse on steroids. I mean, it's in chiastic detail, if that means anything to you. In other words, it tells the story over and over and over, reaches a pinnacle, a climax, and then it keeps emphasizing and re-emphasizing. What Revelation is one great big long 22 chapter. Ready for this? Truly I say to you. It's just emphasizing what's already been said. This is what Jesus is doing over and over and over again. So that's how we have to see Revelation. So Revelation chapter 19, and notice in verse 10 of Revelation 19. This is why these prophecies are so important. Because Jesus said, I came to fulfill these things. If he didn't fulfill these things, we should not be afraid of him. We shouldn't listen to him. We should just completely and totally disregard him. I'm not saying that we should do that, because I believe through faith, as Jesus stated, that his prophecies were fulfilled in the time that he said they would be fulfilled. Revelation 19, verse 10. Ready for this? Then I fell on my feet to worship him. But he said to me, do not do that. I'm a fellow servant of yours and your brethren who hold the testimony of Jesus. So what was the testimony of Jesus? Well, go back and read verse 9. Then he said to me, right, blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And he said to me, these are the true words of God. Then I fell at his feet to worship him. Who are these? Who hold the testimony of Jesus. And what is the testimony of Jesus? It's the marriage supper. It's the wedding feast. This testimony of the wedding feast is going to blow you away. If we can get time to get to this, because I still want to show you something from Matthew 16. Then we'll go to the wedding feast. But he says here, let me read this again. Revelation 19, verse 9. Now, let me go back to verse 7. Let us rejoice and be glad and give glory to him, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. Have you ever studied when the wedding feast takes place? The prophecy about the wedding feast? We're going to look at that. It was given to her to clothe herself in fine linen. Who's this? The bride. Bright and clean, for the fine linen is the righteous acts of the saints. What is the testimony of Jesus? The wedding feast. When does the wedding feast take place? The testimony of Jesus, listen to this. Let's continue reading. The wedding feast is the context. We're going to look at the wedding feast. But what else does he say? Down to, let's read the rest of verse 10. So John falls at this angel's feet, I guess, and he says, don't worship me. I'm one of your fellow brethren who holds to the testimony of Jesus. The scriptures are testifying about Jesus. Listen to this. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Isn't that exactly what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, 17 and 18 and 19 and so on? And you just look at the context there. Isn't that exactly what Jesus said? I didn't come to abolish the law and the prophets, but to fulfill. If prophecy about Jesus has not been fulfilled, then we are still under the confines and the restrictions and the bondage of that old covenant that could never bring salvation. There's no way around that other than to say, well, that's not what people tell me today. Actually, who cares what people tell you today? The simple fact of the matter is, this is what they believed in the first century. This is what the ancients believed long before the first century. This is the prophecies about the first century. We cannot get around these things. So there we looked at the context and the idea of Revelation, 19, 7 through 10. Now, actually, look at verse 11. He says, I saw heaven opened. Behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it is called Faithful and True and Righteous, and judges and wages war. This is the time of judgment. This is the time of the war. And this is the time when heaven is opened. Judgment and the war. And heaven is opened. When is this? It's still in the context of what? The wedding feast. The fulfillment of prophecy that testifies about Jesus. Now, let's go over here and look at Isaiah chapter 24. We're going to talk about this wedding feast. The prophecy concerning the wedding feast. So here you've got Isaiah chapter 24. So Isaiah 24 starts at verse 1. This is what is in many circles referred to as the little apocalypse, the revelation of the Old Testament, Isaiah chapter 24. Okay, so here we go. Trent, I just saw that. Good to hear from you, brother. That's good. That's awesome. Trying to find a biological resurrection in the Bible. It's not there. It's simply not there. It's stated just the opposite every single time. It's just not there. Anyway, I'm going to stay on the wedding feast. So Isaiah chapter 24. Don't be afraid. If you've never looked at the Old Testament, you need to understand Jesus' own words. Ready for this? And we have been taught, and I was erroneously taught for many, many years. Growing up in the Church of Christ, it was just really shoved into my head. Colossians 2:14, that it's nailed to the cross. It's taken out of the way. They didn't even know what that passage is talking about. I mean, they just kind of proof texted for something that they wanted, a point they wanted to make without considering the topic. When is the wedding feast? We were just there in Revelation chapter 19. Okay, we started in verse 7, went through 11. When is that wedding feast? Ready? Back to Isaiah 24. But Jesus said, his own words in John chapter 5, verse 44 says, how can you believe? This is why I want to bring this out. Because I wasn't taught this. I was taught all you need is the New Testament. Am I the only guy alive today that remembers when preachers would carry just a New Testament? A lot of Christians, that's all they carried with them was a New Testament, because they had this erroneous belief that all you need is the New Testament. And I'm not de-emphasizing the New Testament at all. Matter of fact, I am emphasizing it is the sole saving gospel without question. Romans 1 verse 16. But it's incomplete without understanding the old covenant. Listen to what Jesus said. John 5 verse 44. How can you believe when you receive glory from one another and you do not seek the glory that is from the one and only God? That's exactly what's happened today. We're saying to ourselves, oh, hey, I got this figured out. You don't need the Old Testament. So here, you just carry your New Testament. And then I'm going to get up in the pulpit and I'm going to preach, oh, we don't need the the Old Testament because Colossians 2:14 says it was nailed to the cross. So we don't need that. Then we got preachers in debates that say, well, this guy ought to stay out of the Old Testament. Well, that's exactly what you'd like because you don't understand it, apparently. That's not what Jesus said. Verse 44, John 5, how can you believe when you receive glory from one another? You do not seek the glory that is from God. So, yeah, when you're just listening to other men and you've got your little circle of friends that you're looking to them for their approval in that circle, all you're doing is seeking glory from one another. Listen to what he says. Verse 45, do not think that I will accuse you before the Father. The one who accuses you is Moses, in whom you have set your hope. Oh, we don't have time to go through the hope thing, but the hope, let me just state it quickly. Hope is resurrection that comes from Moses. It's handed down from Adam all the way to Moses. And each time God specified when these things would take place. Moses specified when these things would take place. We're going to see this. So the hope is in Moses. In other words, this old covenant, Torah, the law and the prophets. That's what Jesus said in Matthew 5, remember? 17, 18. We just read that. So he says, your hope is in Moses, in whom you have set your hope. For if you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But if you do not believe his writings, how will you believe my words? If we do not look at the old covenant, the law of Moses, the Tanakh, which is, the Torah, the prophecies and the writings, the Tanakh, then how are we supposed to understand what Jesus was saying? There is no way possible for us to understand what Jesus is saying. The only thing that can happen, if we have not looked into the source passages of these prophecies that Jesus said, I came to fulfill, the only way we'll ever get anything from those is trying to plug in 21st century terminology. Here's what happens. I was studying with a fine young man here this past week. And we were looking at the context, Matthew 16. We went back to verse 24. And as this young man read this, it said, if any man would come after me, he'll have to take up his cross and follow me. So he plugged in all the knowledge that he had. And he thought people were coming after Jesus to beat him up. See? But we have to plug in first century knowledge. The way they would have used their terminology, the way they would have understood things, because these were conversations that they were having between them. Jesus was speaking, standing on a hillside, standing in front of a group of people who were 3 feet in front of him or so. I don't know exactly, but they were right there in front of him. And any good speaker is going to look at his audience and he's going to make eye contact. And I'm sure Jesus was this way, making his hand gestures. And he says, there are some here, as his eyes meet some of his apostles, some of his soon to be apostles, his disciples, and the people that were standing there listening. And he says to them, some of you will still be alive when I return. That's what he said. What would you have thought if you were standing there? There's no way on the face of this planet 2,000 years ago that you ever would have considered, if you were standing there listening to Jesus, that it was going to happen 2,000 years from then. Never, 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 never. And if you say that, you're simply trying to cover up for a mistake that's been made 2,000 years later. So Jesus said, you got to go back to the old covenant. You got to read this. You got to understand the law of Moses. That's what we're going to do about, guess what? The wedding feast. Isaiah 24. Behold, the Lord, verse 1, the Lord lays the earth waste, devastates it, distorts its surface, and scatters its inhabitants. Ooh. Sounds like destruction to me. And the people will be like the priest, and the servant like his master, and maid like her mistress, the buyer like the seller, the lender like the borrower, the creditor like the debtor. The earth will be completely laid waste and completely despoiled. Right? That's what it says. For the Lord has spoken this word. Verse 4. The earth mourns and withers. The world fades and wait a minute. Wait a minute. The earth mourns? So you got this big clump of dirt? And he gets a sad face? Do you suppose he's using earth here in a literal sense? The earth mourns, or is it figurative? And withers. The world fades and withers. So if we're going to read this literally, you've got the world fading to black. Just like in a movie, right? They're going to the next scene, and this is fading to black. No, that's not literal. It fades and withers. The exalted of the people of the earth fade away. The earth is also polluted by its inhabitants, for they transgressed the laws, violated statutes, and broke the everlasting covenant. Wait, who broke the everlasting covenant? And when was this everlasting covenant broke? It's not today, because Jesus said, once all of these things are fulfilled, this everlasting covenant is done. It's over with. And it won't happen until heaven and earth pass away. Heaven and earth will pass away. Matthew chapter 24 and verse 35. But my words will not pass away. Are you seeing what heaven and earth is here? Just by the suggestion. It's not literal. It's not the physical planet. It's that old covenant. It makes sense. Heaven and earth, old covenant. My words, new covenant. Heaven and earth will pass away, old covenant. My words will never pass away, new covenant. That's all he was saying. Anyway, let's keep reading. Verse 6, therefore a curse devours the earth, and those who live in it are held guilty. Matthew chapter 23. Jesus pronounced them guilty, and he said that generation was going to have to pay. Made a prophecy. If they aren't the generation that paid for it, when he said so, then we're not supposed to listen to him. Oh, wait, you're waiting for it to happen in your generation? It's not what Jesus said. You might say it. Someone else might say it. Hello, Josephine Watson, who happens to be my mother. You're welcome. Love your mom. Anyway, Isaiah and Robert and John Noe, good to see you. And let's see, Anthony, and I'm sure I've missed some people. Roy Runyon, hey Roy, good to see you here. Catching up on those who might have joined in. Isaiah 24 is back where we're at. Now, have you seen the language here? He said they're going to be held guilty for this. Therefore, the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men are left. This cannot be the destruction of the world, because most of them die, but some of them are left. Check this out. The new wine mourns, the vine decays, all the merry-hearted sigh, the gaiety of tambourines ceases, the noise of the revelers. And if you're using 21st century language, you're not going to get some of these words here. The noise of the revelers stops, the gaiety of the harp ceases. They do not drink wine with song. Strong drink is bitter to those who drink it. Wait a minute. All this devastation has taken place. You got people still alive. They're drinking to try to forget their blues, and it's not working. The city of chaos is broken down. Every house is shut up so that none may enter. There is an outcry in the streets concerning the wine. All joy turns to gloom. The gaiety of the earth is banished. Nobody's happy. Desolation is left in the city. Wait a minute, desolation. I thought he was just talking about the earth. He says desolation is left in the city, and the gate is battered to ruins. For thus it will be in the midst of the earth among the peoples, as the shaking of an olive tree, as the gleaning when the grape harvest is over. They raise their voices, they shout for joy, they cry out from the west concerning the majesty of the Lord. Therefore glorify the Lord in the east, the name of the Lord, the God of Israel, in the coastlands of the sea. From the ends of the earth we hear songs, glory to the righteous one. But I say to you, woe to me, alas for me. The treacherous deal treacherously, and the treacherous deal very treacherously. Terror and pit and snare confront you, O inhabitants of the earth. Wait, who's inhabiting the earth? He was talking about a city. Who broke the everlasting covenant? Israel? The Jews? Just keep listening. Terror, pit, and snare confront you, O inhabitants of the earth. Verse 18. Then it will be that he who flees the report of disaster will fall into the pit, and he who climbs out of the pit will be caught in the snare. For the windows above are open, and the foundations of the earth shake. What foundations of the earth? What did these people who are inhabiting the earth, who were they? The foundations of the earth, the old covenant. This is Hebrews 12, the unshakable kingdom which is coming. This is a kingdom that's shaken, obviously. Let's keep reading. The earth is broken asunder. The earth is split through. The earth is shaken violently. There's that reference again. The earth reels to and fro like a drunkard, and it totters like a shack, for its transgression is heavy upon it, and it will fall, never to rise again. Same language Jesus uses in Matthew 24 and verse 21. These things will never happen again. He was speaking of the destruction of Jerusalem. Where did he get his information, by the way? He was just making it up as he went? No. There's Old Testament context that he's quoting, that he's referring to. Let's keep going. Verse 21, I think. So it will happen in that day. That's significant. In that day that the Lord will punish the host of heaven on high and the kings of the earth on the earth. You might think that he's talking about emperors and kings and princes and royalty. I don't think he is. Matthew 17:25, Jesus talks about the kings of the earth. Who do they pay? Who do the sons of Israel pay their tribute to? The kings of the earth. He's talking about this high priest, those who rule what? Israel. Keep reading. They will be gathered together like prisoners in the dungeon, and will be confined in prison, and after many days they will be visited. If yours says punished, look at your footnote there, my New American Standard Bible. Footnotes it as visited. They'll be visited. He's talking about these people who've been collected in the Hadean realm. They're gathered together. Listen, they will be gathered together like prisoners in a dungeon. That's Hades is described as that. It's a prison. It's a dungeon. They will be confined in prison. And you're going to see this as we keep reading here. And will be confined in prison, and after many days they will be visited. Jesus went to the Hadean realm the 3 days he was in the tomb. He had to go there so he could defeat death, so he could be the firstborn, first fruits, actually. 1 Corinthians 15, around 20 and following, something like that. So he could be the first fruits to come out of there to defeat that realm. So he went there, visited them. 1 Peter 3:19, by the way. Isaiah 53 as well. Then the moon will be abashed, and the sun will be ashamed. Moon and the sun? Who is this? These stars and these celestial references are referring to rulers and those who rule over us. And we see that with Jacob and how he established that. And Jacob, right? And his glory, wait a minute, messed up. For the Lord of hosts will reign on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem. When did that happen? Is that yet to happen? Or is he reigning? When did that happen? It was in the 1st century. All of that we're reading here is about the first century. There's no question about this, and I'm going to prove this as we continue to go through here. And you're going to notice the wedding feast is posited right here in this chapter, and the next one, in when? The first century. I'm going to show this. And all these events take place in the first century. For the Lord will reign on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem. It doesn't get any clearer than that. Unless you're looking for what? A temple to be rebuilt, the whole priestly system to be reorganized and reinstituted, and we're going to send all the Jews back to Jerusalem and kill them all. Really? Is that what you want? God never, ever, ever said he was going to do that. Matter of fact, right here, the prophecy is, guess what? Will never happen again. Jesus reiterated this promise. Remember what we said? He's making a promise. He's reiterating a prophecy. If it doesn't come to pass, don't listen to him. Either it came to pass, and he is Messiah, as he proclaimed. Revelation 19:10 says that these prophecies prove him as that, or we just shouldn't be listening to him. It's a free-for-all. Here we go. Continuing on. And his glory will be before his elders. Chapter 25 of Isaiah. Now, if you're just joining us, I suggest, once we're done, go back and listen to this, because I'm trying to follow this logic through here to illustrate what Jesus was talking about fulfilling these prophecies. Okay? Matthew 5, 17, 18. This is why the law of Moses is no longer in effect. It's taken out of the way. It had to be, or else there's still unfulfilled prophecies and it's still in effect. That's what Matthew 5, 17, and 18 says. So here's what you've got. Isaiah 24. Jesus is directly quoting from these concepts, and maybe directly quoting from them in Daniel 12 and plenty of other places in the Olivet Discourse. It's not just one thing, but it's lots of these. So Isaiah chapter 25, O Lord, verse 1, you are my God. I will exalt you. I will give thanks to your name, for you have worked wonders, plans formed long ago with perfect faithfulness. These prophecies are working out exactly at the time prescribed. Remember the New Testament when it says that Jesus came at the right time? There you go. This is the telos, by the way. It's when these things were prescribed to take place. That's a whole other study by itself. Verse 2. For you have made a city into a heap. Any doubt what he's talking about? Still the same context. A fortified city into a ruin. A place of strangers is a city no more. It will never be rebuilt. So for those of you listening who like to say that Jerusalem's going to be rebuilt and the temple's going to be rebuilt and all of these things are going to take place again, Jesus never said that. He said directly the opposite. So a fortified city becomes a ruin. A place of strangers is a city no more. It will never be rebuilt. Therefore, strong people will glorify you. Cities of ruthless nations will revere you. For you have been a defense for the helpless, a defense for the needy in his distress, a refuge from the storm, a shade from the heat. By the way, that's 2 Thessalonians chapters 1 and 2, and all of it, actually. A breath for the breath of the ruthless is like, lost my place, a rainstorm against a wall. Like heat and drought, you subdue the uproar of aliens. Like heat by the shadow of a cloud, the song of the ruthless is silenced. The Lord of hosts will prepare a lavish banquet for all peoples on this mountain. What mountain was he talking about? He just said it. In Zion, it's Jerusalem. It's at the time when all of this devastation is taking place, when the earth is shaken, the powers that be fall. That's Matthew chapter 24, 29 through 31. The sun and the moon and stars fall from the sky. The Lord comes with these angels gathering from the four winds. That is this time. Do you see that? Now, before we read any further, here's what we've seen. Isaiah 24 is pre-destruction of Jerusalem, or during the destruction. You know, that siege didn't happen in one day. It took 3.5 years or better, actually. The war, the fighting and all that, I mean, it culminated and then finally surrounded it in 66 and so forth. So it took 3.5 years, as prescribed, by the way, by the Lord. Revelation 11. Now, Isaiah 24 is, up to the point that we read through verse 5, is essentially talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. In verse 6, after the destruction has happened, after the relief has come, 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, after the drought is over, it's metaphorical, it's not literal, after the aliens have been subdued, after all of these things have taken place, it's destroyed so that it can never be rebuilt. Verse 6, the Lord of hosts will prepare a lavish banquet for all peoples on this mountain. This is the time of the wedding feast. Remember what we read in Revelation 19. Starting at verse 7. The Lord of hosts will prepare a lavish banquet for all peoples on this mountain. Notice what this is saying. A banquet of aged wine, choice pieces with marrow, and refined aged wine. And on this mountain he will swallow up the covering, which was over all peoples. What did we just read back here in Isaiah 24? It says in verse 22 that they are gathered together like prisoners in the dungeon and will be confined in prison. And after many days, they will be visited or punished. It should be visited. Punished is not a good term. Read it again. Verse 7. On this mountain, where's this at? Where does all this stuff take place? It's in Jerusalem. Zion. We just read it. He will swallow up the covering which is over all peoples. What's the covering over all peoples? It's Sheol. Even the veil which is stretched over all nations. And he will swallow up death for all time. That's 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 26. He destroys death post 70, post destruction of the city that will never be rebuilt. Not Masada, by the way. Just saying. Just throwing that in there. Okay, I'm gonna take a drink. Trying to wrap this up on time. Did you see all that? Verse 9, Isaiah 25, and it will be said in that day, wait a minute, I missed some stuff. Back to verse 8, he will swallow up death for all time, and the Lord God will wipe away tears from all faces. When are the tears being wiped away? Revelation 21. When are these tears wiped away? At the destruction of Jerusalem, post-Jerusalem, in the new covenant, the new heavens and earth that are created. Revelation 21. That's exactly what it says. Go over there and read it. We're running out of time, so I don't have time to go over there and go through that. But I'm still going to go through this. When are these tears wiped away? What are the tears that are wiped away? Well, you think, well, I'm never going to cry again. That is not what this is saying. The reason they were crying before is because they were separated. Man was separated. Man, verse 22, chapter 24, was gathered together like prisoners in a dungeon. Sheol separated man from God because of sin. Isaiah 59, verses 1 and 2. And when the Lord came, we're going to keep reading this. He removed the covering, released the prisoners to salvation or destruction. Verse 8, Isaiah 25. He will swallow up death for all time, and the Lord God will wipe away tears from all faces. We're reunited with our Father. The relationship we had pre-fall of Adam was restored. And he will remove the reproach of his people from all the earth. For the Lord has spoken. And it will be said in that day, what day? The time of the destruction of Jerusalem. It will be said in that day, behold, this is our God for whom we have waited, that he might save us. Hold your finger there. Go over to Hebrews chapter 9. You got to mark. You got to write this reference down somewhere around Hebrews chapter 9. Ready for this? Here it is, verse 28. So Christ also, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, he came bodily, physically, the first time. He dealt with the sin problem. He was offered once for the sins of many. Nobody's going to dispute that, if you're a believer at all. But how do you explain the second part of verse 28? Will appear a second time for salvation without reference to sin, to those who eagerly await him. This is Isaiah chapter 25 and verse 9. This is our God for whom we have waited. When does he come? At the wedding feast, at the destruction of Jerusalem. They were waiting for this. National Israel was waiting for this to take place, for Messiah to return for their salvation. This is the Lord for whom we have waited. This is our God for whom we have waited, that he might save us. Isaiah 25:9. This is the Lord for whom we have waited. Let us rejoice and be glad in his salvation. Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 28, the latter part. He will appear a second time for salvation without reference to sin to those who eagerly await him. This is our God, our Lord, for whom we have waited. Love it. Man, this is what we have now. And if you believe Jesus is returning in the future, we're still miserable. We're still mourning. We're still crying. We have no reason to rejoice. Man, oh man, have we got reason to rejoice now. So here's the synopsis of Isaiah 24 and 25. Isaiah 24, I'm just going to say through chapter 25 and verse 5, is regarding up to and during the destruction of Jerusalem. When it's completed, then the wedding feast takes place. Man, this is all over. Jesus says this time and time and time again, and he gives us illustration and illustration and illustration about people coming to the wedding, and then these guests that weren't invited, they get kicked out and thrown into outer darkness. What do you think all that's about? If you're trying to read into that with first or 21st century knowledge and understanding, and you've totally neglected the Old Testament like I did for 30 years, you're going to come up with something totally different than the plain words of Jesus. It's just that simple. That's pretty powerful, I think. Now, I want to go back over to, and there's more there that I'm just running out of time. And I try to keep these right at an hour because that's a long time. I generally preach 40 minutes at least. And I can see people doing that. So I'm trying to cut back on that, but I have so much I want to say. And so I try to keep this around an hour, but let's go back to Matthew 16, 27, 28. And I want you to see things through first century eyes. Ready? No. Through Jews who knew the old covenant. Through their eyes in the first century. Matthew 16, verse 27. No, guys, I'm sorry. I got to do this. No, I'm not apologizing. I take it back. I take that back. I'm going to go through Matthew 16, 24 through 28. It won't take real long, so just hang with me. Let's set the context. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? What's he talking about? You're going to have to follow me. You're going to have to become a Christian, essentially. You're going to suffer persecution. When does this persecution take place? At the destruction of Jerusalem. I know I'm leaving a lot unanswered here, but there's no question. This is what Jesus was predicting. And when you go to Matthew, everything eschatologically, in other words, prophetically, that Jesus is talking about in his entire lifetime, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, every single thing that he's talking about is about the same event and the things leading up to salvation. You get it? Okay, this is one of the signs. Martyr vindication. And he's telling his apostles, these disciples, technicality, I know, they're going to become his apostles officially, but he's telling them, hey, this is going to cost you. Verse 27. For the Son of Man, now notice this, Just go look this up. You can go to BibleHub.com, look up Matthew chapter 16, interlinear. You'll see that this is exactly the truth. Go to verse 27, or if you've got an interlinear actual paper, book, you can do that. But it should read, this is where our English translators really wimped out, because they're trying to open their newspaper and say, I didn't see it, therefore it must have not happened. So they inserted something here that really watered it down. Verse 27, Matthew 16, the Son of Man is going to come? No. Should be about to come. Mellow in the present indicative. This is taking place now. These events are taking place right now. I'm going to show you the parallel here. I said I would do that, so I wanted to do that before we quit. The Son of Man is about to come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and will then repay every man according to his deeds. Where did we just read that, by the way? That concept, the wedding feast. He says the Son of Man, that's Jesus, is about to come. Look at the parallel. Verse 28 is a parallel. Truly, there's your first clue that this is a parallel statement. Truly, I say to you, there are some of those here, or who are standing here, who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in power and great glory. If you look at the synoptics, coming in his kingdom. We could go through a few passages and equate the fact that the Jews in the first century used kingdom and glory to be the same thing. And what did Jesus say in verse 27? The Son of Man is about to come in the glory of his Father with his angels. Truly, I say to you, there are some standing here. What's the time frame for verse 27? It's about to happen. Jesus narrows it down, and he defines what mellow, that word that he just used, what it means. And when is that time frame? What is the telos of mellow? Do you get it? In their lifetime, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see these events taking place. You see how simple that is? But we make it so complicated because we have other people telling us. We have other people telling us, no, it couldn't be that way. I didn't see it, therefore it didn't happen. There's still bodies in the graves. My dear and beloved brother Trent apparently made a comment about that. Guess what? Trent's right. Love it, love it, love it, love it. Man, I am so excited about this. You know, I never could have got this excited before when I was a futurist, and I thought I had to live every day in my perfectionism, and if I messed up, God flipped my salvation switch off. And now I live in grace. And Ephesians 2 makes so much sense to me now. Oh, just gives me shivers and chills up my spine. Love it. Guys, I hope you've been encouraged by this tonight. And I thank you so much. I thank you so much. Actually, Tim, real quick, I think you're right about that. I think you're right about that, the parallel there. Thank you so much for y'all for listening and being patient and going through a little bit of exegesis on these passages. I'm telling you, this motivates me every day. If my heart were to stop beating, I know that now I see the truth and I'm okay. I'm all right. And I hope that others pick up on this message and they don't have to live in misery anymore. And they can revel in the victory that Jesus accomplished exactly the way that he said he was going to. I'm not going to start preaching again. Sorry. I just get so excited about this because, man, we've got it. We've got it today. That's what being, me too, hon. That's what being in Jesus and clothed in Christ, Galatians 3:26 and 27 is all about. That's what it's all about. Read it. Check it out. Tell me. It's simple. It's right there. You want to be clothed in Christ? Go over there and read it. Galatians 3:26 and 27. I'm telling you, go read it. It's the same thing as Romans 6. There you go. Love you all. I'm going to be back here next week, same time, and 8 o'clock. And so tell your friends. We also do this on YouTube. Please go over to YouTube, Restoration Movement 2.0, and subscribe to that. You can go back there and you can see all these videos. They're organized a whole lot better there than they are on YouTube. Matter of fact, probably a little better quality too, although the camera angle is a little different. But you still get the GTO in the background. Just saying. So go over there and subscribe. Make comments on YouTube. The more you comment on YouTube, the more views it gets. So please make some comments on that and help me out with that if you would. And by the way, I'm thinking about changing the name of that before I get millions of subscribers. I don't know what it'll be yet, but something a little more relevant to prophecy somehow. But I don't know. So you might tell me what you think about that too. So outside of that, we will see you next week. If you're in the Indianapolis area, come visit us at 2675 Kentucky Avenue, Indianapolis, Indiana 46221 at the West Side Church of Christ. We are emulating the first century Christians in their actions and in their beliefs, as we see plainly and squarely put in the New Testament and the whole Bible for that matter. Come be with us. Love y'all. Keep up your studies. And Brother Trent, if you're still listening, love you too, my brother. I hope you have a wonderful time and safe travels. And how about being politically correct? Your lovely, significant other as well. Love her too. Look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you so much.